This story is told from the perspective of a 24-year-old female. I live in a village in the middle of the English countryside. To paint an accurate picture of its size, it has a population of 4,000, but feels more like 1,000 due to its spread out nature and being surrounded on all sides by lots of fields, farms, and woods that eventually connect to a pretty famous forest. It's kinda in the middle of nowhere, and because of this, has notoriously bad phone and internet connection. Having lived here all my life, I know the place like the back of my hand. I know where all the public trails are, where they connect, which ones are shortcuts, and where to cross the deep streams. I've gone on walks in this area throughout my childhood with my parents, and alone as an adult. Nothing bad had happened. I felt safe here. This story takes place last summer in July after I moved back home from university and had yet to get a job and smoked a lot, a habit my parents hated and which I tried to keep hidden from them by going for evening walks, with multiple joints hidden away in my pocket. As usual, this day they both got home at 5 p.m. We had dinner and chatted for a while longer than usual, as my mom had quite a hectic day and was telling me about it. Because of this, I ended up heading out for my walk an hour later than routine, around 7 p.m. But as it was summer, the sun was still shining, so honestly, I didn't really notice that it would start getting dark while I was still out. The woods closest to my house is less than 5 minutes away, and you enter through a gate into a farmer's field. You can see across the open area quite far until the first set of small woods obscures your view. That's where I was heading, as I knew this track takes under 2 hours and leads back onto the same path I was standing on now. More than enough time to smoke the 3 joints in my pocket and for the smell to leave my clothing. This entire area is very popular for dog walkers, so it's not unusual to see other people while on the trail. And as this is a village, everybody says hello to each other. I lit my first joint and started walking. I'm just in my own world for a while, until I was less than 100 feet from the entrance to the woods. An old man was coming out of them, throwing a ball for his dog. I finished my joint and stubbed it out. As I got closer, I recognized it was my neighbor John, who lived on the road next to mine and knew my grandpa. We stopped and said hello as I petted his dog Max. While talking, I see another man coming out of the woods. No dog, bright green jacket, very tall, and had a good 10 years on me age-wise. Me and John chat another minute. He warns me not to stay out here too long as it will start getting dark soon, and we say goodbye. I continued on down the path towards the man. When we were nearly passing each other, I look up to make brief eye contact, smile and say hello, like everyone here does, even if you don't recognize the person. My eyes instantly met his. He was already looking at me. His dark eyes locked on mine. He wasn't smiling. I didn't know him at all, but I knew something was wrong. It was in his eyes. I swallowed my politeness and looked at the ground as we passed. I had lived in my university city the past couple of years, so I knew a red flag when I saw one, and my countryside manners evaporated. I quickened my pace a little, and before entering the woods, slyly looked back. The guy was still walking back in the same direction, following John. I felt relieved, laughed, cursed a joint for making me paranoid, and continued walking into the woods. It takes about half an hour to follow the path through the woods to the end. The pathway exit opened into another field that led to another set of woods. The sky was now violet, the dimming light having been obscured to me by the trees. I was almost done smoking and was near the entrance to the second set of woods when I felt it. Fear. Complete, crippling, absolute fear worked its way like a current through my body. I'd never felt anything like it before or since, but I knew what it was. I whipped around. Standing at the exit of the first set of woods was the man. I could still make out his green jacket in the fading light. He must have doubled back toward me, and very quickly too. I had looked back several times while in those trees, and he wasn't there. For a second I froze. So did he. He knew I'd seen him. To run the distance between us would take him about 5 minutes. He was obviously in good shape. I threw the joint and bolted into the woods, the only way I could go. I didn't dare look back behind me. I sprinted for a couple of minutes before taking a sharp left turn off the path into the trees, hoping to throw him off a bit, but I couldn't see a thing. The light was already darkening, and the trees made it 100 times worse, especially as I was now in the thick of them. their branches catching on my clothes like fingers, whipping and scratching my bare legs so bad I bled. I ran and ran. My lungs were in pain, hating me for smoking so much, while my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I couldn't anymore. I threw myself on the ground behind a thick trunk, my back against it, knees to my chest, my hand thrown over my mouth to stifle my labored breathing, desperately trying to pump air into my lungs for the next sprint. I listened for the first time. A few seconds passed silently. Then I hear him. Heavy footfalls snapping twigs behind me, and about 20 feet to my left. I dare not look in case he sees me. I have my phone, but I know I have little chance of having signal being where I was, and knew he'd either hear me talking or see the light from the screen. I'm not ashamed to say at this point, I start to cry, the tears falling silently down my cheeks. I hear a deep voice exclaim, "Where are you? I know you're here. I saw you." I have to clasp both hands across my mouth to stop my scream from escaping. I can hear him moving around. I panic and find enough courage to slowly peek from behind the tree. He was about 10 feet behind me, less than 20 feet to the left, with his back to me. I move back, and my eyes search the area around me. I pick up a pretty heavy rock. I carefully check on him again. His back is still turned, but he's searching through the trees, hunched down lower to the ground now. I make a snap decision, and with everything I had left, I threw the rock behind me and to the right. It clattered through the branches of the trees and made one hell of a noise. I watched him immediately bolt in its direction, laughing like a psycho. I paused a little, hearing his footsteps get quieter, until I thought I wouldn't be so visible to him if I moved and threw myself forward. I ran, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, but I was also aware that I was getting further and further away from home. I knew there had to be a stream somewhere close. If I found the stream, I can follow it, as it borders the land and ran parallel to some of the footpaths. I ran, and ran, until the trees finally cleared, and I could just make out another field through them on the other side. I thank God and push myself a little bit further till I'm out of the trees, and suddenly, the ground disappears from below my feet, and I go head over shoulders down the stream embankment. I crash into the water below, my mouth open and lungs filling with muddy water. As I spit it out, I feel both relieved to have found the stream and terrified he's heard me. And now my phone is ruined. I slowly make my way downstream as quiet as possible, listening out for him the whole time as the stream borders the woods, looking up periodically just in case. After a while, maybe half an hour, I notice the trees begin to thin out and realize this is the edge of the woods, where I would have been exiting and where the pathway connected to the original one I had started on. If I ran, I could get home in less than 20 minutes. As quiet as I could, I dragged myself on my stomach back up the embankment, army style, wanting to stay as low as possible. I peeked over the top. I could just make out the opening of the woods exit path around 50 feet away. I sat and scanned the forest line for a couple of minutes, my eyes trying to make out movement despite it now being pitch black. Nothing. I couldn't hear anything. I pushed myself up and sprinted as fast as I could across the field onto the pathway. I knew the gate I had entered through was in the connecting field. It really wasn't that far. I was so happy. I then heard the man yelling, trying to get my attention from across the field. I swear my legs nearly gave out then and there. He had been waiting for me. I turned my head and saw him sprinting out of the woods at full speed. I screamed and pushed myself further, tears coating my face. All I could do was run. I crossed into the main field now, and I could see the moonlight shining off the metal gate. My house was just 5 minutes away after that. I have never focused on anything as much as that gate. He was faster than me and getting closer, screaming at me the whole time about how he was going to slit my throat. I ran and ran, pushing myself up and over the gate, and ran up the road. I glanced back as I made the turn for my road. He was still following me. I raced up my driveway and barged in through the door, running into the living room crying and screaming hysterically, pointing behind me towards the door. My dad ran outside while my mom grabbed a hold of me as I collapsed, shaking. It turns out my parents had already called the cops, As I said, I was going out for an hour or so at 7, and it was now past 12 a.m. I didn't answer when they called my now broken phone, very unlike me. We called the police again to explain. They came, and I gave a full statement. Both my parents and the police were horrified. Nothing like this happens here. There hasn't been a reported murder or violent crime in the last 100 years. But one look at me, and it was obvious I was telling the truth. I was covered head to toe in cuts and bruises, soaking wet and covered in mud and blood. I won't go into how this experience changed me. It's depressing. But I will say the thing that scares me the most is that they never even had a suspect. Despite him following me so closely, he was gone by the time my dad ran outside. That guy is still out there. In May 2009, I had just broken up with my girlfriend. We moved from Calgary to Toronto, and were still stuck living together after the breakup, as we didn't know many people in the city yet. Needless to say, the situation was pretty stressful and upsetting. So when a buddy I was going to school with at the time suggested a weekend camping and fishing trip, I jumped at the chance to get away for a bit. He grew up in an area about an hour outside of Toronto called Flamborough. It's really beautiful. Loads of lush forest, farmers' fields, and small rivers and creeks. We decided to camp and fish along a creek called Grindstone Creek. It's close to some wetlands and the fishing is supposed to be great. We ended up setting our camp in what was probably a farmer's field, bordered by a gorgeous forest. I'm guessing it was trespassing on our part. We spent the evening fishing, chatting, and drinking. As it got darker, we made a little fire and roasted potatoes and hot dogs. All in all, it was a really good night. We turned in just after midnight. We shared a tent. My buddy fell asleep before me, and I stayed up playing on my phone until probably around 1:30. I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember was being woken up by a high-pitched yipping type noise. I was kind of groggy, and it took me a moment to fully wake up. The yipping was incessant, and it sounded like a weird coyote. I laid there for a moment listening, and then started playing on my phone again. The noise was annoying as hell. I tried ignoring it, but it sounded like it was getting closer. Finally, it sounded like it had to be no more than 10 feet away from the tent. At this point, I was getting a little unsettled. I had seen coyotes in Calgary before, and I thought of them as pretty harmless. They never looked much bigger than a smallish dog. But what if this one was rabid or something? What if it could smell our food? I nudged my buddy to see if he was awake, and he was. The noise woke him up too. We discussed what to do about the coyote, as we hadn't brought anything to scare off critters. Not a BB gun, nothing. Finally, he decided he would shine the flashlight on it, and holler a lot, hopefully scaring it off. He unzipped the tent, and I watched him pointing the flashlight out into the darkness. I'll never forget what happened next. His legs suddenly went all wobbly, and he sort of stumbled backwards into the tent. He had a really dumbfounded look on his face when he looked at me and said, "It's not a coyote. It's a guy. Some weird guy." Normally, I would have thought he was messing with me. I'm a huge wimp and scare easily. I won't even watch horror movies. But I've never seen someone look that scared, and I never want to see that expression on someone's face again. So I knew he wasn't pulling my leg. The weird yipping and howling type noises were still going on, and in retrospect, it really didn't sound like a coyote. But I guess in our groggy states, it was a way for our brains to make sense of it. Anyways, he kept telling me to just look out the tent flap, to make sure he's not going crazy. At this point, I was having a full-blown anxiety attack. My heart was racing. I felt like crap, but I had to look. So I slowly peeked out of the flap and waited for my eyes to adjust. And that's when I saw him. He was standing only a few feet away from the tent. He was swaying a little and wearing a baseball cap. What made it awful though, what was really creepy, was that he was wearing a woman's lingerie. That's when I knew there was most likely something very wrong with this guy, if making high-pitched noises at a stranger's tent in the middle of the night didn't give it away. After I pulled my head back inside the tent, my buddy and I discussed what to do. We decided to yell at the guy to get out of here. My buddy started yelling at him, "Get lost, we're trying to sleep here." The noise stopped. It was dead silent. And that's when we heard footsteps running towards our tent. They stopped right outside the tent, but we didn't waste any time. We started yelling again. We told them we have phones and that we're calling the cops. With that, we heard him walk by the tent and head off. Sounded like he was moving towards the road. Needless to say, we laid awake, petrified until the first sign of sunlight. Then we hightailed it the hell out of there. We talked about our experience on the way home, and we were both pretty embarrassed about how scared we got. It definitely was not manly on either of our parts. I think because we were both ashamed of how we let some weirdo freak us out so much, we really haven't talked about it since that day. I'll always wonder what the hell that guy was doing out there, or what was wrong with him. Sometimes, I wonder if things would have turned out different if we weren't a couple of wusses. I'm not saying he was some serial killer, but seemed like he was testing who was in the tent. Guess I'll never know. And for that, I'm kind of glad. My childhood best friend Marie and I were around 12 years old at the time. Marie's family had their own campsite in a provincial park around 2 hours from our hometown and would spend their entire summer each year living in their camper out there. This particular summer, I was able to go and stay with them for a week, and we were excited to spend our time adventuring around the forest. On the last night I was there, we decided we wanted to hurry down to the ice cream shop by the lake before it closed. It was early evening at this point, still pretty bright out, but beginning to lose light. The path we took was down a short slope right next to the main road, with maybe 10 feet of thick brush and trees in between. On the other side was the forest, with more tall, thick brush. We were walking along, not seeing a single other person on the path in front or behind us. Suddenly, we heard rustling and the snapping of branches, similar to the sound of maybe a deer moving through the woods. I wouldn't have thought anything of it, but then the sound of running footsteps follows. Marie glances back and suddenly grabs my arm, urging me under her breath not to look back. At the same time, the running stops. I don't know why I didn't just ignore her and get a look myself. I guess I could sense the very real fear in her voice and chose to listen. We both start to panic, getting that feeling like you're running up the stairs after turning the basement light off. We pick up speed as much as we can without breaking into a sprint, knowing the ice cream shop is only about a minute walk away at this point. The path soon breaks, and we get to the parking lot. Suddenly, Marie steers me hard to the left, heading towards the lake and the boat rental instead of continuing straight to the ice cream shop. And I go along with it silently, understanding ice cream is no longer an interest right now. Marie is clearly panicking at this point. We're both looking around, but it seems whatever scared her is nowhere in sight. Marie walks up to the boat rental and rents us a kayak, and we climb in and begin to paddle out into the lake. As we paddle, she tells me that there was a man behind us and that the man had stopped running at us very abruptly upon making eye contact with her. He had been wearing a long black coat with the hood up despite it being in the middle of July, had a terrible smirk on his face, and she swore that as he stopped running, she saw him put something shiny away in his coat. He appeared to have just emerged out of the bushes after we walked past, given the sounds we heard right before he came running onto the path. We reach the center of the lake and stop paddling. I pull out my Nokia brick phone that my parents had given me in case of an emergency. I hand it to Marie and tell her to call her parents to come pick us up. As the phone rings, I see her look past me to the shore and go pale, lifting a hand to point to what she's seeing. I turn, and there was the man, making his way around the path that circled the edge of the lake, staring out at us. We sat in the middle of the lake and watched him make 2 full laps, never looking away from us, before finally disappearing. It took a few tries to get a hold of her family. We were freaking out so bad the whole time as the sun was getting lower and lower. We did manage to have someone come with the truck, but by the time we reached the shore, it was pretty dark outside. I don't know what we would have done if we hadn't been able to call for a ride. Looking back, I don't know why we didn't just go up to the ice cream shop, inform an adult there, and ask her parents to come get us from there. But it worked out. We got back safe, and thankfully, we never saw that man again.